Welcome to Kevin Toll Reads. Hope you're doing well. It's time for Saturday Shorts. Excited to talk about these short stories today because I read the McBain brief. It's going to be a struggle. What is with this weather change? These seasonal changes made everything a struggle, it seems like lately. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just struggling. On the struggle bus, once again. I just feel like I complain all the time. My wife says that too. Maybe there's some truth to it. Maybe this is a good thing. Maybe this is where I was meant to be here, thinking about talking about Saturday Shorts and screwing up so I could realize, have an epiphany that, I'm just judgmental and the problems are all here. Or maybe, I'm just crazy. I could be both. I could be crazy and have problems. I don't know. Like a normal Kevin Toll Reads video, though, this is off the rails. Can't wait for the train to come in the background because I'm getting ready to record. Cue the intro. Welcome back to Kevin Toll Reads. Yes, I tend to have to kind of make my way into a video sometimes, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it's kind of quirky, and I'm just going to leave that in there. It's who I am. But anyways, we're here to talk about Saturday Shorts, and yes, I read Ed McBain, and I'm here to talk about it. The McBain brief. So let me give you some author insights, little fun facts I uncovered. So first and foremost, this was published in 1982. It's 20 tales of cop stories and crime stories. I didn't read all of them. I'm going to talk about that as well. It's also available on Kindle Unlimited. I got it on Kindle Unlimited, the McBain brief and stories. Yeah, if you have Kindle Unlimited, you have that subscription. There's this collection, and there's a ton of 87th Precinct novels out there for free on Kindle Unlimited right now. So definitely worth your time. I really like Ed McBain's writing. We're going to touch on that here in a little bit. But before McBain became famous, known as kind of like the master of police procedurals, he wrote science fiction novels under a couple different pseudonyms. In 1951, in Science Fiction Quarterly, S.A. Lombino, which is his real name, a.k.a. Evan Hunter, a.k.a. Ed McBain, he wrote a short story, Reaching for the Moon. It's actually on Project Gutenberg, and I found out about the fact that Ed McBain wrote science fiction before writing the crime and cop and police procedural stories in his 87th Precinct. I thought that was interesting, and then I kind of went further down the rabbit hole and realized that, hey, his original short story was written under his real name, Lombino, and it was published in Science Fiction Quarterly in 1951. And that short story, Reaching for the Moon, is on Project Gutenberg. So I went out and downloaded a text file of it. It's about like three or four pages at most. It's interesting, and I'll give you a brief summary. It's about a man named Sanders. He's asking for funding from the four richest men kind of in the world. He brings together in a conference room and talks about what he wants to do. He wants to take a rocket to the moon and back, and he wants to get ahead and wants to kind of push the United States, to do better things. And the men don't want to fund this. And it has this really interesting twist. Again, it's like 3 pages, maybe at most, but it's a really neat little story. And again, it's free in Project Gutenberg if you want to take 5 or 10 minutes to read it real quick. It's kind of interesting. I enjoyed it. And so without further ado, we're going to dive right in. Again, I really love McBain's writing, and I read 5 stories. Before we get started, I wanted to say I started reading one of the stories I had planned on reading, one of these short stories, and I realized I read it before, and it must have been in the Learning to Kill collection from Ed McBain, so I must have just not paid attention on my spreadsheet, and when I put the title of the short story in, or it was in under a different title when I read it prior, but I know I read that short story about a police lineup. I know I've read it. So I stopped reading after I got about 5 pages in, and I picked a different story. I ended up reading 5 short stories from this collection. So let's dive right in and talk about them. So my first short story is titled Death Flight. It's 41 pages in length, the longest short story of this entire collection, and my favorite of the 5 I read. The summary of Death Flight is we have a private eye by the name of Milt, and he is investigating a plane crash, and he's doing so for a retired wealthy gentleman named George Ellison. George wants him to investigate this plane crash because one of the people that died, there's I believe 6 people that died on the crash, one of them is his daughter Janet Carruthers, and Janet died, and George wants to know under what circumstances. Was it a mechanical failure and just a case of a really bad luck and terrible circumstance, or was there an ulterior motive? Was it murder? Was something else going on? And Milt is a little reluctant to take on this case, and he actually tries to talk Mr. Ellison out of doing it, especially when he goes to investigate the plane crash and people start firing long-range rifle shots at him. And so as Milt dives deeper and deeper, he realizes in this investigation that 1, he's over his head, and 2, that this is a story of privilege, of money, and just how far people will go and how despicable they will be to keep the truth hidden. And that's all I'm going to say about this one. So let's talk a little bit about what makes it a good short story. The character work is fantastic in this. You really latch on to Milt Davis as a private eye. You start to really kind of push away some of these despicable people, and you're like, how can these people be like this? Especially both Janet, who ends up passing, her estranged husband and what he is doing, Captain Nicholas Carruthers. There's other players involved. I really like the ticket salesman, Tony Radner. There's a ton of twists that end up happening. As you think you know where this is going, there's these twists that happen. I really like that. There's one particular instance about the midway point during Milt's investigation where he goes to buy life insurance for a flight. He finds this kind of like almost kiosk type place back then where you could purchase life insurance, up to $25,000 of life insurance for like 50 cents before heading on to a flight. And it really caught me off guard in the story about that. I didn't know at the time that is a interesting and a very well-placed kind of nugget in the story. It's not just kind of add fodder in the story, and that's all I'm going to say. But in terms of rating and overall, I gave this a 4.6. It had me really engaged. I love a really good twisty, turny, whodunit, cat and mouse private eye story, and this one definitely hit all of those highs. It really read like a hard case crime story. Classic PI. I love the twist. It was really, really good. And so now on to the next short story. So the second short story is titled Hot Cars. It's 11 pages in length. The summary of this one is you have a gentleman, he's in prison, and he's telling his cellmate, his cellie, a gentleman by the name of John, who never speaks in this story, that he's telling him basically how he wound up in jail. He's kind of laying out the play and the history, and so you get the story kind of from this gentleman's perspective. John, throughout this telling, is really not interested, but he's keeping his mouth shut. The gentleman that's telling the story, which I never did get the gentleman's name in this short story, and I think that's intentional, but he tells about, how he winds up in there trying to sell a hot car, and how his cohort and his love, a lady by the name of Clara Parsons, she should have been here by now. She should have came and visited him, but she hasn't. And he keeps mentioning this, and it's kind of humorous in that regard. But he goes through basically how Clara and him have been pulling fast ones on people, selling hot cars for cash and selling them off and getting paid, and how they basically social engineer people into some easy money. And so that's kind of the premise of this, and it's kind of very obtuse in a way, but it actually makes it an interesting read in that kind of a concept and construct. So let's talk a little bit about what I enjoyed. The prose of this is very interesting. It's told from this gentleman's point of view, and you're listening to him talk about it, and he has a very interesting kind of tone and cadence to how he's going about doing so. As I mentioned before, he keeps making these nods about, I wonder why Claire hasn't been here, and I'm sure she's just, getting herself all together to come see me one of these days. And it's kind of humorous. He keeps kind of interrupting John, like, John, you shouldn't pick your teeth with that, or John, are you nodding off? And it's kind of almost humorous because the guy telling the story he just kind of is a nonstop talker. There's never kind of a break in the sentence, which definitely reminded me of kind of Seinfeld, where he mentions, there's that part where it's like, why did you and her ever get together? It was like there was never a break in the conversation. It was always really good, and we never had that awkward pause. And it kind of reminded me of this in this story. I really like the part where he tells him to stop picking his teeth because his toothpick broke, and then he's got a paper clip, which I thought was interesting that they would have paper clips in a cell, but I have to remember the time that this took place as well. But that was really interesting. The story in itself is kind of interesting. I did like how this ends up being like con over con, and that's all I'm going to say to not spoil it. In terms of rating and overall, I gave it a 3.5. It's good. It didn't blow me away. It's a story with a kind of nice little twist at the end. And it kind of gets right at the heart of it from the get-go. It's, again, slightly humorous, but just an okay story. And so now on to the next one. So the next short story is titled The Interview, and it's 15 pages in length. And the summary of this is it's an interview. There's a director. He's being interviewed by a journalist about a film he just made, and they made it in Italy. And apparently there was the main girl, the younger girl, 18 or 19, that was in the film, that was cast as the lead female. As she drowned in Sardinia, where they were filming, they did a scene where she jumps off a boat and has to swim to a dock, and she never surfaces. And so what makes it interesting is this is all happening. The director is being interviewed, and he's kind of a curmudgeon. He is a man of very few words, and when he locks on to his opinion about something, he doesn't sway from it. So the remainder of this film that he ends up finishing has to be edited, and they continue production even after the lead female passes in this accident on film. The interviewer is asking him various questions, trying to get at the heart of the matter to see and judge what the director's kind of mindset is. And through these questions, we get a sense, and we get basically told what this story is really about in this tragic event on this film set. And so that's kind of the summary of this. What makes it a good one is it's very interesting way of telling a story. Especially even a short story. From a premise perspective, it was very interesting. I enjoyed a lot of the vagueness of it. There's not a lot of names that are given. In fact, I don't believe there was a single name given in this short story. I enjoyed the director. As a character, I think McBain wrote the director very, very well. He reminded me, again, I have to reference Seinfeld, but he reminded me heavily of the character, the Soup Nazi, especially at the last episode of Seinfeld when they're going on the plane and then they have to debark and they make fun of a guy in this small town and they get thrown in jail, and the prosecution brings in all the characters that the side, Elaine, Jerry, George, and Kramer have ever kind of wronged, and obviously they bring in the Soup Nazi. And when he's being kind of deposed on the stand, he asks a question, and the Soup Nazi's like, "No, next question." And that heavily reminded me of this director in this story, because he's so very abrupt, and he's like, "I'm in control." When the interviewer thinks he's in control, the director's like, "I'm in control." And it was very interesting. There is one excerpt that I thought it really kind of stuck with me when he's talking. The director is kind of giving an answer and giving a little more detail. He said, He said this: there is no satisfying the American appetite for scandal. And that is very true. Very, very true. And so, in terms of rating and overall, I give it a 3.8. It was definitely a step above the previous short story, Hot Cars. I liked it. I wouldn't say it was great, but it definitely was good. And I liked the character, the director. And I thought the premise of this interview and then getting all the backstory of why we're here, the fact that there's no names given throughout the short story, just made it kind of an interesting kind of premise for a short story. So now on to the next one. So our fourth short story is titled The Last Spin. It's 7 pages in length. The summary of this one is interesting. It's another short story where you're kind of just thrown into this and you're kind of figuring your way out as it goes. But we have 2 young men. One is named Dave, one is named Tigo, and they both wear different colors as they are appointed by their clubs or gangs as appointees to settle a matter. There was some type of rivalry territory dispute while under a truce that happened, and instead of having an all-out gang on gang, club on club war, they appoint Dave and Tigo to settle the matter. What you don't understand, though, is how they're going to do that. When you are launched into this short story, you realize that Dave is sitting across from Tigo. They're at a table. There's no one else there, and they're down in a basement. They mentioned Brooklyn, so I assume this all takes place in the greater New York City area. And yeah, that is kind of what is happening. How they're going to settle it, though, is very interesting, because what they're going to do is they're going to settle the matter playing Russian roulette. And that is the summary of this thing. What makes it a good short story is it's kind of unsettling. And, you're thrown into this premise from the get-go. They start having a conversation at one of each other, and you kind of slowly learn of how they got there and why. And it's very interesting. And they start having conversations, and you could tell at first, like, neither wants to be there, and they have no ill kind of will towards each other. And they start having some conversations, start relaying information to each other as they start playing the game of Russian roulette. And apparently they're appointed on behalf of each club, each gang, to see who is going to be the last man standing. And there's a nice little twist that happens at the end. I really liked kind of the dread that happens throughout there as they're getting familiar and almost friendly with them as they're going about this ordeal, that there's this impending dread that's taking place. That's this underlying tone in the story. And so, yeah, in terms of rating overall, I gave it a 4.0. I thought it was really good. I enjoyed it. It's a short, but it has a lot of punch to it. I really liked the dread, the tone, the characters, and kind of the premise of this. It's really interesting. And so now on to our final short story. So the final short story of the 5 is titled One Down. It's 3 pages in length, and although it's small, it's pretty mighty. I really enjoyed this one. The summary of this is we meet Ben and Adele. And Adele is kind of nagging at Ben, and throughout this conversation, you realize that Ben and Adele are obviously a couple, and they've recently moved from the city to the country. And Adele does not like Ben's job. Ben, for his work, has to travel a lot, and because of that, it leaves Adele feeling very lonely, especially after moving from the city to the country. And she's hounding Ben about this, and you can tell Ben is kind of keeping his mouth shut for the betterment of the relationship. And that's the summary of this thing, because what starts out as kind of a slice of life, a microscopic view of an intimate relationship between Ben and Adele, turns into something drastically different, and I don't want to spoil anything. So what makes it a good short story? Obviously, I was very hip on the characters because, again, it encapsulates a married life and conversations that happen between a husband and wife very, very well. You get the husband who's getting nagged on, and I'm not saying that that's always the case in married life, but I am saying, like, it is a common trope with married life, and McBain writes it very well. Ben's kind of just being very quiet. It's a commonality that you see in a lot of marriages. However, it is also very well placed because there is a huge and abrupt change in the story. Again, this is 3 pages, so there's a lot that happens. And so the twist that happens is very abrupt, and it really kind of punches you in the face as a reader. The last line of the short story is really quite humorous, especially as you think reflectively about what you just read over the course of those 3 or 4 pages. And so I really enjoyed that. In terms of rating overall, I gave it a 4.1. Solid short story, only 3 pages, but man, did it pack a punch. I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really great kind of way to cap off this episode of Saturday Shorts. And so overall, Ed McBain, I'm kind of a mixed bag this week. I've been really kind of hitting it off with Saturday Shorts. They've all been really, really well. This one was kind of a mix, and that's okay. I had 2 that were kind of meh. I had 2 good ones, and I had 1 really great one. So I'll take that. Most collections are a mixed bag, no matter who the author is. But yeah, I've definitely been riding a high on Saturday Shorts for the last several months, but I was bound to have a couple misses, and this definitely was. I still like McBain's writing style. It's superb. It really is. It's fast-paced, hard-boiled. It's whittled down. I really like a lot about it. His characters, they're hard-nosed. They're believable. They're almost kind of grimy, and even when they have flaws, the flaws have a feel to them that really just comes out. I think he does really well. He seems to grasp plot, pace, and characters without ever really getting hung up on world building. And I never find myself reading a McBain short story and think, well, what about what's going on? Where are we at? Like, none of that seems to matter. I'm so engrossed on what's going on, who these people are, having favorites, or I like that character, I don't like that character, that I never feel like I'm missing something. Even when the short story overall isn't great, I still enjoy it. It's never bad. And so that's my take. I hope you enjoy this. Saturday Shorts, Ed McBain, really mixed bag, but I'll take it. It's Ed McBain. So hope you're doing well. Hope you're reading something great, and have a great weekend. I'll talk to you later. So my first short story is titled Death Flight. It is 41 pages in length. It's the longest short story in this whole collection, and the longest, if it's the longest in the collection, it's obviously the longest of the 5 you read, you moron!